Maybe you've seen this map. It's conceptual, of course. It's the old pinwheel map, but notice in the center is Jerusalem here as the center of the world. And this was done in 1581. Heinrich Bunting, a German artist or geographer. Noticed we get over here kind of left out, North America here. The new world, the new America, but Europe, Asia, and Africa sort of all gathered around. And I just think that's interesting to start when we talk about Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is certainly on all of our minds in the daily papers and news, and it's not always good news, as you know, but it's very important. Now, here's another little interesting thing you can do with Google Maps. If you want to play around with it, I like doing this. You can zoom in to Jerusalem, and you can actually see, even in this sort of curved fisheye view, the city four square. Look at that. Jerusalem is four square. And we're going to really talk a lot about this huge area that's the most hotly contested piece of real estate on the planet, with Jews, Christians, and Muslims all having had a presence here, Jews first, and Christians, and Muslims, and then the Turks, and then the British, and then the modern state of Israel, and the Palestinians, and so forth. So this is not a political lecture. We're going to go back 2,000 years, but I really like that image as well. And here is a fabulous drone shot from a plane and using a drone. And you can again see from the air, look at this, see the four square form of the city there. So this is called the Old City, and this is called by Muslims the Haram, and by Christians and Jews, it's usually called the Temple Mount. And this is where the ancient temple of Jerusalem stood. I'm going to focus first, if you can see my cursor here, on an area outside the present Turkish wall. This wall right here is from the 1600s, and I'll explain that a little more as we go along. But the reason I'm going to focus here is UNC Charlotte, since 2007, has been the only American university doing archaeological excavations in the city of Jerusalem. And all of this is considered Jerusalem, but we're right outside the present walls of the old city. And I'll explain that as we go. Here is where our excavation is, and I want to begin with that. It's this tiny little triangle of land outside the Turkish wall. You see here the Turkish wall. Here's the Temple Mount, or the Haram again. And then this wall, which forms what we call the Old City. It has quarters. This is the Christian quarter. This is the Muslim quarter. This is the Armenian quarter. The Armenians are the oldest Christian community, so they have their own quarter. And this is the Jewish quarter. The Jewish quarter is actually the smallest. And this is Mount Zion. It's actually the highest point in Jerusalem. If you're standing on top of Mount Zion, you can see the whole city like a landscape. You'll see plenty of pictures of that. Some of you know from the New Testament, if you're coming from a Christian background, this is the Mount of Olives. So north, south, east, and west. Try to kind of orient yourself, because we're going to flip around a lot. And I'll always use those parameters to help you find where we are. So let's go on down to Mount Zion. And here we will talk about our dig. I'm mainly going to focus on what's called Herodian. Herodian is Herod the Great, the reign of Herod the Great. He died in 4 BC, and I'm going to use the historical dates BCE. You're probably used to that. We use it at the university. But he started reigning in 37 BCE, died in 4 BC. We think Jesus himself was born in 4 BC. So right when Herod died, Jesus is born. Some of you know that from the Christmas story and so forth. And as I said, we have this Mount Zion dig, UNC Charlotte. We're very proud of it. And we're finding everything that's there, but we're particularly interested in this house that we found, a priestly mansion from the 1st century. And in fact, it might be a house that Jesus would be connected to, as you're going to see. Those of you that are Christian, I'll try to make all the references to everybody. This is a famous painting by Roberts of the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. Of course, he did this in the 1850s, I believe. He had no knowledge of the archaeology or the history. He's just imagining. But one of the things he imagines right here, this is that Temple Mount. Now we're on the east side looking west. And our dig, you can't even see here because it would be basically in the far west right in here. So we're flipping around. This is him imagining the Roman troops on Mount Scopus overlooking the city as they burn it to the ground. Notice this Colosseum here. Isn't that interesting? Because that hasn't been found, but I'm going to talk about where it might have been. But this temple, I'm going to come back to this later, but look at the style of the temple as he made it. He imagined it like a Greco-Roman temple. You see, we're going to talk about art and architecture. So don't take this photo, this painting as historical, but it gives us the idea that Jerusalem was destroyed in the summer of 70 CE or AD. Now, let me just make an explanation about why are we digging outside the city. And I want to point out that this area here, where my cursor is, this whole northern area, was not here in the time of Jesus. And by the time of Jesus, I mean the early 1st century. It was added later. You can see this little scale here. If you get the video later, you can study it a little more. Here's the Temple Mount. This brown or tan area is the city today. I don't know if you can see that, but it says Turkish wall right there. You see that? So, and our dig is right here outside the Turkish wall, as I've explained. But if you take the main city in the time of Jesus, I'm just going to say 1st century instead of keep saying the time of Jesus, but you got my idea. Notice this. There's the 4th square of the ancient city. This is added later. We're not digging, people sometimes say, oh, too bad you couldn't have dug in the old city. Believe me, we're in the old city. I tell Charlotteans, we're at Trade and Tryon, okay? You get it? We're in First Ward. This is the middle of the old city. This is the Levain Mint Museum. We're digging the main part of ancient Jerusalem. Once you understand that, you realize that, yeah, you could go inside some of these areas, but this wouldn't even be the ancient city because it was added later. These are the 3 excavators. This is me a few years ago. This is Shimon Gibson. Shimon is a full-time professor in the Department of History at UNC Charlotte, I'm proud to say. This is Rafi Lewis, who teaches at Ashkelon University in Israel. Shimon is a British Israeli and green card holder in America, so he's really international. These 2 are archaeologists with PhDs. I'm the historian. So I come along and help them interpret it all. But I've been doing archaeology for so long, I suppose I wouldn't call myself professionally an archaeologist because I don't have that kind of doctorate. But let's just say I do archaeology. I go on digs, I participate, and you learn it after a while. People always ask, so I wanted to point out, how do you get to dig in Jerusalem? What goes on? I said we're the only American university digging in Jerusalem. Why would that be? Why aren't there like dozens? Mainly because the Israelis are doing almost all the excavating in Jerusalem. It's pretty controversial to dig in Jerusalem for political reasons. But we're kind of grandfathered in because Dr. Gibson, the gentleman you saw in the middle, Professor Gibson, he, in his younger years, had this area we're digging in assigned to him by a supervisor that was in charge of it. And so now when we decided in 2007 to go back and apply for a license, he was able to get the license because he had already been previously licensed. And then the site just lay fallow for all those years. Let's see, it was in the 70s. So over 30 years, nothing was done. And he was doing many, many other things, publishing numerous books, building his career. And he said to me, this was in the year probably 2007 or so, 2005, we started talking about it. He said, James, do you think UNC Charlotte would like to sponsor a dig in Jerusalem? And I'm like, yeah, but how would we possibly do that? How would we get the license? And he said, we can get the license if you come along as part of UNC Charlotte, which I did. With the dean was involved. Our former chancellor, James Woodward, who's even before Dubois, was the chancellor then. Loy Witherspoon, whom some of you probably know, was legendary with Bonnie Cohn as one of the first faculty and founders and promoters of our great university. And so we applied and we got the license. I know you're probably not fluent in Hebrew, but some of you might know a bit of Hebrew. That actually says Shimon Gibson Shimon, University of North Carolina, Charlotte, James Tabor, and Rafi Lewis. Look at that right there. So what do you need to dig in Jerusalem? Well, first of all, you have to get them to license you. So we're a licensed, authentic academic excavation. You got to have a viable site, an academic sponsor, the license, and then the funding, and you guarantee the funding. University does not pay for the dig. A lot of people wonder that would be taxpayer dollars. It's special projects in the state system are funded by grants and fundraising. It's kind of a sink or swim thing. I'm sure the Mint Museum is familiar with that. You got to raise money a lot of times to do things. It's nice to have endowments, but a lot of people think, oh, it's so great that the university pays for all this. They, of course, handle the funds. It's done through the university, and they do put in money sometimes for students and so forth. Here's what it looks like. Our little triangle right there. See the Turkish wall running right there? And here we are. And that's what it looked like for 30 years. Modern road. They built this road for the Pope to go on years ago in the 60s. He was visiting Jerusalem and he needed a road to go up to the Upper Room, which is a main Catholic site. But so there is a road now, a paved road, and all the tourists go by this road. I think every tour bus, 3 million tourists a year that visit Israel and Jerusalem, they go by this road, and it's usually jammed up, and so they all see our site, as you're going to see. Right there, this photo was taken years ago. There was nothing to see, just kind of vegetation and no gardens or anything. Now, you're going to think, whoa, what happened here? Where are we? Here we are. I just want you to get your orientation. So here you can see over, it's off my screen, but I can move it over. There's this, whoops, didn't mean to do that. That's the Temple Mount area there. Here's our little triangle. I call it our little triangle right here. This is Mount Zion as a whole. There's that Turkish wall. So we are excavating right here. So what have we found? I put this in symbolically to ask you, if you're looking east and you see the sun coming up over the Mount of Olives, is it sunset or sunrise? You know how these pictures are. So you can see that it's sunrise. What does this mean for us? It's the rooster crowing at 5:30 in the morning, believe it or not. Some of you know the reference in the New Testament about the cock crowing thrice, right? Believe it or not, still happens today, 4:30, 5 o'clock. Light begins to dawn and the roosters begin to crow. We are there at the site at dark as the sun rises because it gets hot later in the afternoon. Here we are in 207, just beginning to excavate that old site that had been left. You can see it's just kind of left, and we just arbitrarily picked right here. We could have gone down here, but we didn't want to remove these olive trees. This was bare. And here we are the very first week with our teeny little team of UNC Charlotte students. We've been digging the John the Baptist cave, which you can read about in my book, The Jesus Dynasty. But we went over, had the license, and we began to do a little probe. This is called an archaeological square, but it was very much a probe because we didn't know, where would we dig. In 208, which was just a year after digging, you can see behind, it's barely started. Some of you know Phil and Lisa Dubois, our chancellor for all those years. There's Dale Halton, I see. And I see some other well-known figures in Charlotte. I bet you can identify some of those. I won't start naming people because I'll probably forget some names, but this is the chancellor and his wife doing a little work, as you can see, and they were very excited. And here's our little group celebrating the inauguration of the dig. Now, it began to look pretty good. This was, I think, 208 when they were there. Might have even been 209. I'll go back one to notice this sign is really kind of embarrassing. It's just on a board, and look at, got a chain link fence. This says do not enter. Doesn't really keep anybody out, mainly for safety where kids won't fall in the holes. But even here, here's our gate, and you can see the fence, and there's that sign again in the corner. Kind of told people, but people on the road would not be able to see our dig. But it's beginning to take shape. Right away, we began to find some walls, and we began to try some other areas, and you'll see that it progressed. Typically, we have 20 staff and 30 to 40 volunteers, including UNC Charlotte students. Many, many years, we would take 15 to 25 UNC Charlotte students. The Levine students have been twice as a team. They choose a study abroad experience, about the Levine College or Levine program. And here you see the reason they're looking kind of like this is because this is the end of the day, about 2 o'clock, and they haven't had lunch yet, and they've been working since 5:30, and they're ready to go. So there they are. This is Dr. Gibson talking to them. But I love this picture because everybody's kind of looking down like this is the saddest moment of my life, because I've got to listen right before I go eat lunch at 2 o'clock, and it's about 90 degrees. But anyway, it's a great group. You can imagine the solidarity, the team effort. We run a field school. So we're not just playing around. We teach the students archaeology. We have all majors, not just religious studies, history, or anthropology. We get majors. It's a study abroad program. Now, this was taken right before COVID. I think this was 2018, but pretty much we did a little more in 2019. And I love this picture because now we've got, this is a garden area. We would have the right to extend to the road in the parking lot. We don't think we're going to do that because, leave it for the future. We could also go south in our little triangle, but we've picked the middle, and you can see there what we've done, and I'll show you close-ups. What we came on here is a early Roman house, a priestly mansion from the time of Jesus. But notice where we are. There's the famous Golden Dome of the Rock. That would be the Temple Mount or Haram. And this little gray building is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And this is the Jewish quarter. So talk about being situated right in the middle of everything. You look to the right and you see the Muslim area with the Haram, they call it, or the Temple Mount, as the Jews call it. You look to the left and you see the holiest site in Christianity. And here we are digging in what was the center of ancient Jerusalem. Here's a closer view, and you can begin to see this is where our first century house is. Unfortunately, because Jerusalem was destroyed, we only get the lower levels. But here we have Byzantine, and you're going to hear about Byzantine, maybe you already have chronologically. That would be like 4th century, 5th century, 6th century, all the way up to the Muslim conquering of Jerusalem in the 7th century. This is Islamic. So we like to preserve all the levels. Like we could take this down to the Roman, but we don't want to do that. See these bags right here, by the way? These are full of dirt. Look at that. And that has to be hand carried off. Look at all of this along the fence and all the rocks. We keep a clean site, as you can see. And as the buses go by, they see our sign and they back up, trying to get up to Mount Zion. So our chancellor said that sign, here it is right here. I'll show you a close-up later from the outside. Our chancellor Dubois said that's the best advertisement UNC Charlotte has in the whole world, because you have 3 million tourists going by that road on their buses, and the buses get stopped and they look over and go, oh, I didn't know UNC Charlotte had a dig in Jerusalem. But this is what we're going to focus on, because we're doing art and architecture. And this tarp right here, I can zoom in a little and let you see it. This tarp right here is going to lead into a bath and a mikveh. If you're Jewish, you know what that is probably. And over here is a kitchen area of this priestly mansion. And so we'll get down close. Here are just some typical scenes of the work. We made the cover of Bar magazine. I don't know if it was our wonderful, enthusiastic student on the ladder, or if it was our dig. I think it was both, but we got the cover of Bar magazine. Live the Dig, Life in 2010. So that really was great to have the cover of a major magazine. And here we are. That shows that I do some work. I'm uncovering a mosaic there as we took it on down. That's from the Byzantine period. This is our dean, Nancy Gutierrez, who just retired. I also retired in July. She retired. I think our provost is retiring. We have a new chancellor, of course, and things are changing. But this was our first glimpse of a bath, and you're going to see it all in a minute. And you can see how the debris and rubble builds up over the centuries from different levels of destruction. But this kind of fresco is very important to us, because this would have been on the walls and it would have been beautifully decorated. Many of you traveled and you've seen ancient sites in the Roman Mediterranean world, and you know that to look at bare walls like this does not really tell you how they were plastered and beautifully decorated in the 1st century. If you've been to Pompeii, got some pictures later of that I'm going to compare, then you know that because Pompeii was literally destroyed in over a 3-day period by the ashes, and now that it's been excavated, you can still see the wall panels. You can see all the things that have deteriorated at this site. But here is just a tiny sample of the literally millions of pieces of pottery and artifacts that we have found in this 15-year period that we've been digging. It all has to be sorted, all has to be classified, and we keep meticulous records and mapping so that eventually we can go back. There's a CAD program where you can create virtually the whole site, and it would show day one when we started and take you all the way down to where we are, and it would show you everything that has been discovered. And we can look, like literally, if I just zoomed in and said, would there be a record of this particular thing? Yes, believe it or not, the work is so meticulous. Dr. Gibson is a stickler for detail. You can see the 3 of us here with our dean, and the dean has been over a couple of times, very proud of this work. Okay, let me go back. Not sure what happened. There we go. Just a little bit, we have a dig headquarters, the Loy Witherspoon headquarters in Jerusalem. Lloyd donated in his will money for Mount Zion. It was a real love of his life, if you knew Loy Witherspoon. And you can see this is Shimon Gibson and Gretchen, who is his main assistant, going through a few hundred sherds from this one bag. You see how the bag's labeled? And these are just, he saves mainly the pieces that would indicate the type of pottery. and the little teeny things are thrown away, but they look at every one because sometimes they have writing on them, as you're going to see as we go on. Here's some of the team working. This was in 2019. The last season we got shut down in 2020, 2021, and 2022 by COVID. But here you can see, this is our little photo lab. Some of our permanent staff. These are students washing pottery. Here's a reconstructed vessel. Isn't that amazing? Just completely reconstructed. And this is from the Roman period. You can see some of the lovely design of the things that we're finding. Okay. Sometimes we find really wonderfully exotic things like this gold coin. That is the Emperor Nero. You don't find many coins of Nero in Jerusalem, and certainly not gold coins. I think one other has been found. What does that indicate? It's from the 1st century. It would indicate that some wealthy person in Jerusalem even had a gold coin of the Emperor Nero. And this particular coin dates to the 60s CE or AD. Students are thrilled to find these coins. We found now I think it's up to 4,500 coins. Here's an example of a coin. This, people have said, is that a guitar pick? Nope, not quite. This is from the 1st century. This is a woman's makeup spatula. It would have had a handle right here, a long stick-like handle. And this is the outside of it. And you would dip it in your makeup and you would be able to spread your makeup. Again, the mark of a lady of some status that's found in our house. This is a close-up of a coin. This snail is very important, and I'm going to explain later why it's important. I think I have another picture of it. But if I don't remember the snail, why would you care about a snail? Because this snail is from the Mediterranean Sea. What's it doing in Jerusalem? This is a snail. It's called a murex snail. And from this snail is extracted the purple dye that the priests used in the time of Jesus to dye their robes. And if you know Judaism, what's called tzitzit, observant Jews wear those, Gentiles call them strings, those colored strings on their garment underneath. And that has to be done with this special dye. We found dozens of these in our priestly mansion, meaning that the person probably living here is definitely a priest, maybe even the high priest, because he is manufacturing in his house the purple dye to be used. And we'll talk some more later about who he might be. The dishware is beautiful and imported rather. And this is actually from the Jewish quarter. Our pieces we do have a few whole vessels, but we have many, many fragments of this kind of, it's called sigillata with the beautiful designs on it. So again, a sign of wealth. This stone cup was found at our site. It was broken. It's been reassembled. It's now going to be part of the Israel Museum because it's inscribed with 13 lines of Hebrew. We've been able to decipher it. It would again be used by a priest. It's made out of stone, limestone. You can see it's carved out of the limestone with the handle. But to have this prayer, the first time this has ever been found, a prayer inscribed from the same script that's used in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we know it's 1st century, and it says, Lord, I have returned, celebrating the idea of the Jews coming back to Jerusalem and so forth. And that cup has proven to be one of the most important things that we've found. Nothing like this has ever been found. I consider that art. As far as architecture, there is our bath. I know it doesn't look like much, but boy, when we entered that entrance, you saw the entrance barely peeking out in that other picture. Went inside, it's really beautifully built. You can see the well-constructed walls. There's the little bench where you would sit to take your clothes off. This is the clay tub. There are two other bathtubs that were found in Jerusalem in the priestly area near the temple. This one is larger, so it's sort of like my tub is bigger than your tub. Definitely an important family. The reason you have the tub is to bathe in, but right next door to the tub is a mikveh. And the mikveh is just a step pool going down to dip yourself ritually. So this family has its own bathtub and ritual purity pool built in. Those Orthodox Jews today, even in Charlotte, the Charlotte synagogues have mikvahs for various rites of purification, conversion, and various life cycle rites. And it's at the synagogue, but this family has a mikvah at their home. 3 ovens in the kitchen, 1, 2, 3. And this is just where the oven was. These are bread ovens called tabun. And so the family is able to bake bread with 3 different ovens and cook other things. So more signs that this is a really important family. Now, when you dig, you get all of the stones and the rubble and the dust and the dirt and so forth, and you find the remains of things. So we really need an artist to imagine Jerusalem in the first century. So you talk about art and architecture. This is an example of the house that we're digging, but this would be the roof at the very top. And then we would be all the way down at the bottom, digging the bath and the mikveh area and the oven area and the servant quarters and so forth. Now, there is a room above the bathtub that we haven't opened yet. We're waiting, and we got shut down by COVID. Believe me, we're pretty excited about that. So we have a 2nd-story room. We think we might even have parts of a 3rd-story room. If that's true, our site would be the only place in all of Jerusalem, because it was so flattened by the Romans, to have a residential example of a house with more than the basement. So that's very exciting for us as a university. So imagine our people here looking out from their balcony. They can see the temple. They would be up high on the 3rd and 4th floors on the roof. And this is an artist's reconstruction of what the temple looked like. We're going to look quite a bit at the temple, but remember this archway right here with the triple gate. This gate is visible. This is actually visible today, because even though the wall above it is reconstructed, the ancient wall down below and all along here is still preserved. These steps are still preserved, as I'm going to show you. They were underground. They've been excavated in the 1960s. You're going to get lots of other pictures, so don't worry. This was done just to show what our house would be like if you were on the veranda having your gin and tonic or whatever you're having, probably wine, and a very, very wealthy family. Now, we're going to find pieces of the frescoes and pieces of the roof and parts of the column and decorations. And you already saw that nice pot that was being reconstructed and tables. Furniture is going to be gone long ago, probably burnt, but we find burned layers. And then this is a mosaic floor. We do find pieces of the floor there. Can you see the temple there? Just over on the horizon. Okay. We also find things that are very indicative. This arrowhead is from the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC by the Babylonians. Imagine. So you're jumping back 500 years. This is the only evidence of the Babylonian destruction that's ever been found, and it was at our site as we dug on down below. No, there's no doubt that there's much more. The fact that we have this little triangle and are taking it down the rectangle that we've designated by our fence, taking it all the way down to the Iron Age. This is the Iron Age. We're going to find more, and it's really exciting. This is from the siege of Jerusalem. It's another level. Remember, I showed you there's Crusader levels and Muslim area levels and Byzantine and then Roman. This is from the Crusader period, it's a Muslim earring that hung from the ear, and it was just found in the rubble when we were wet sifting soil that we had taken up. And it was in a clump of soil, and we use wet sifting where the water melts the soil away. And look at that. That will be a treasure now in the Israel Museum. And we can pretty well date it to 1099 when the Crusaders were coming into Jerusalem. And we are digging right at the place where the Crusaders entered and broke into the wall. And probably this was booty from a Muslim woman that one of the Crusaders took and maybe put it in his bag. And we found it over 1,000 years later. So that's the dig. There's much more I could say. This is the sign I mentioned. That's our great advertisement. It's been updated now. This is the older picture. I just love this with this. These are two Levine students saying, welcome, come on in. You can see our lovely fence, no more chain link fence falling over with the gate that hardly works. We've got a good fence, and so we're very proud of this. And now our new sign, which I don't have a picture of, has a map, and it shows colors of the different areas where people walking by on four sides can see our site. And believe me, UNC Charlotte is well known in Jerusalem now because of these things that we're doing. So let's talk about the temple. I've mentioned it. Here's a great shot of what it looks like today. This is before the southern, this is, okay, north, south, east, west. This is before the southern steps were uncovered. You can just see the beginning of the uncovering in the 1960s and 70s. This has also been uncovered. This is all now on display. You can see the Muslim houses. You can see the Byzantine material. You can see the early Roman. They're doing the same thing we're doing, but of course it's much larger. The Israelis did this. This is the mosque. The Golden Dome is not a mosque. People think of it as a mosque. It is a shrine over a rock. So it's called the Dome of the Rock. It's to protect a rock. And when the Muslims conquered the land in the 7th century, they built this shrine over the rock to protect it. It's an octagon building. It's very beautiful. Tourists can't go in now because of political turmoils, but over the years, I've been going to Jerusalem for 30 years now. I used to take students in and we would sit and study. It's all carpeted and beautiful inside. This is the El Aqsa Mosque. Yeah, according to Muslim tradition, Muhammad came here in a night journey, rode his horse through the air and landed right here on top of the Temple Mount, and a mosque was built. So, but we're going to kind of do the archaeology of it all. Okay. Now, here is a reconstruction of what that area looked like in the time of Jesus in the 1st century CE, before the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. I'm not sure the temple looked like this. I've already mentioned that, and I'll get to that in a minute. This was called the Antonia Fortress. It's a military barracks that the Romans built where they could watch over the temple area. But here are these steps going up. There's a double gate and a triple gate, and then the royal porch or stoa. This is that archway going up from the city, and this is the temple area here. It is 24 football fields. I'm using the American analogy of a football field, 24 football fields. So it is huge, 145 acres. So what did Herod do? There's that same picture again, just to give you the orientation again with the people going up into the temple. Anyone you know from the 1st century, Jesus for the Christians, Hillel for the Jews, Gamaliel, other famous rabbis, everybody would have walked up and gone through these gates into the temple, and we'll see what has been discovered. This I put in just for the topography. Our house where we're digging would probably be right here. Of course, this is just imagined as to the houses, probably be here. Remember, you could look over from your balcony and see the temple. There's a very deep valley here. This is the Kidron, and this is the Mount of Olives. So again, just to give you the contours of it all, as it was in that time. Today, looking, now here I'm on the Mount of Olives, looking back toward the temple. There's that Alaska Mosque. You can see the Dome of the Rock. And I put this in to show you this corner has actually been preserved. The steps are right here going up, and this corner has been preserved. And if you look closely, I'll zoom in, you can tell yourself, I think, that this lower course of stones goes along like this, and these are Herodian stones. And as these are in place for the past 2,000 years, this is not the temple. This is the outer walls of the temple, which Herod built. And then you have other building all the way into the Muslim period. But that corner has been preserved, and that's just very significant because we can see the stonework. I'll show you some more pictures of that. Now, this is the holiest site in Judaism today that Jews can visit. The very holiest site would be up on the Temple Mount, but that's pretty controversial. Even though Jews are allowed to visit there, they're not allowed to pray or conduct any services. But this is called Christians often call it the Wailing Wall. That's kind of offensive to Jews. It came from the Middle Ages when the Christians would say, oh, look at those Jews. They're crying and wailing because they don't believe in Jesus, and, they're mourning their temple. But we call it today the Kotel, which just means the wall, or the Western Wall. So it's the western side. These stones, though, here are in situ, as we say. These stones are from the Herodian period. Look how huge they are. And then these stones, as you can see very clearly, are later. So there's a foundation of the Temple Mount as it was in the first century. This is our chancellor's group walking around up on top, and then you can see a close-up of the stones and how they looked at that time. Do I need to make this maybe smaller? Yeah, I need to move this over. Sorry if you were missing anything. Let me go back to that other slide. I think I enlarged it at one point and probably got it too large. There. Even the size of some of these, this channel was put in later, but you can see all the way up to here. That's that arch right there that we'll see more of as we go. Okay, I got to watch my zooming in. This is underground, under the Western Wall, and to the north a bit. Look at this. There's a human figure. This figure is standing at the edge of this stone, and it goes all the way across. You can see how tall it would be. It's larger than a locomotive car. One of the great questions is, how could they possibly have put this into place? Because it's going to remind you of the pyramids. Well, Herod was very proud of this. He wanted foundations down to the bedrock. These stones were carved outside of Jerusalem. They were brought in on rolled wheels with pulleys and horses and oxen pulling them in, and then they were hoisted up with levers. And the weight of this has been calculated. I didn't write it down, but it's unbelievably huge, as you could imagine. Now, there's the reconstruction of what we're talking about. There's the archway. These are the steps. This is how you would go up into the area. And we're going to talk about this royal porch. We know, how could we possibly know what this is like? Because you can see in the modern pictures, it's not there. We can know because of detailed descriptions by the historian Josephus and some archaeological remains that have been found. If you find one of the roof pieces underneath in the decorations, you can begin then to see what the whole thing looked like, as you'll see. Okay. These are those steps. Now, the Israelis, for tourists, have put modern steps over some of them, but they've left the ancient steps right here. So look at these stones right here. You can tell those are from the first century in place. And you can even see part of the gate here, and right here, I don't know that you can see it in this picture, but these are the outlines of the triple gate that you can see here. So when you walk, if you go to Jerusalem with me, I take a tour every March. I'm actually taking one this month in October, take a group to Jerusalem and show them all these things. But if you go with me in March, you can write me. My email is jamestabor@me.com. So easy to remember. And if you're interested in going on a tour with me, and you get to walk up these steps, sit on these steps. And for Christians and Jews, I think they're particularly meaningful because they've been covered over for 2,000 years since the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. Not only are they beautiful, you can see it was a great kind of espalade of steps, but also just the idea that people ask, where did Hillel walk and where did Jesus actually walk? And yes, there's no question that everyone from that period walked up these steps, from the Apostle Paul to any ancient rabbi that you know of the period. So it's, to me, the steps are just exciting to visit, and my students feel the same way. Now, here's what Herod did. There's where the Dome of the Rock is. This is going to be the portico and the steps going up. He enlarged the whole area by building these fortified walls, putting them down to bedrock, and then filling it all in so it would be solid. So you can see it was quite a building operation. It is the largest temple and compound in all of the ancient world. Nothing in Rome rivals this. Herod was a friend of the Emperor Augustus, and his sons grew up in Rome in the palace of Augustus and Tiberius. And so, he really wanted to impress the Romans, and he builds a temple. This shows the temple was like this before Herod started, and you can see all of this was added after he started. And this was in the time of Jesus being finished still. But there are references in the Gospels to Jesus walking in the portico and teaching in the portico. That's in the New Testament. Also going up to the temple and through these doors. Inside, you had the different parameters of the temple where Gentiles are allowed out in the big court and only Israelites inside the inner court. That's also covered in the New Testament. This is one of my favorite shots. I think you can figure out its model by the people standing there looking at it from our group. But I went up really, really high and got this up a staircase so you could get more of a view. And I want you to remember this right here, this Colosseum here, or this stadium, because this hasn't been found. This was Herod's palace. On the west side, he built himself a very nice palace. Our house probably would be one of these right here that we're digging. These are just put in by imagination. They're not actual houses that have been found. I think our area is the only place where a residential place has been uncovered. The rest is all built over today. But you get an idea of how it was, and you'll see other pictures of the temple itself. This was taken in the 1920s. It's a British photo from a plane. And Dr. Gibson and I began to notice, look at this right here. Look at that. And our site is just right up here to the left. So we wondered if this were excavated, and we haven't done it yet, but it's our idea that we've been talking about with Israeli archaeologists. This looks like it could be layers of the stadium or the theater. Let me go back and show you again in the model, you see? And again, the model, you don't know if the model's accurate. So, but this does, it could be agricultural terracing, but it doesn't look like agricultural terracing. So this is something for the future if we decide to do further. This is the model again, but showing you what they say the temple was like. And here's the portico and so forth. I need to look at my time. Okay, 11:38. This is our artist's reconstruction of the portico and what it would have looked like. And inside, look at that. And how, as I said, how would you even possibly know this because you're going to see in a minute fragments of this, and as well as the floor, have been found. So by finding that, you can reconstruct everything just like we're doing with the houses. And then Greco-Roman style. So if you went up through these gates, you would be under this, what's called the portico, and you can see it's just very beautiful. Look at this. This is still underground. It's not available for tourists, frankly, because the Muslims and the Jews are at odds about the Jewish temple even being here. There's some denial that there was a temple. This particular architecture is not normally seen by anybody. It's unfortunate. It's under now the present surface of what's called the Haram, or the Temple Mount. But you can go down. I've been down there, and you're allowed to go down if you're authorized to do it. And you can see what's left of that portico. This is the roof of the portico, and then other modern structures, not modern, but, and here's a piece of it. Look at that. So from these pieces, and then flooring, pieces of flooring have been found. And these are real. These are not reproductions. We found enough to tell the pattern. And so that's, it reminds you of Muslim art in that you're not going to put all kinds of figurines and so forth. Now, here's a question. Did the temple look like this? This is the model. It's at the Israel Museum, by the way. I always take my tours to the model. You get to see it. But did it look like that? Or did it look more like a Roman temple? This is a temple in Rome. I think it probably looked more like this, because Herod's building it. He's Roman. He's building it. He wants Augustus, the emperor, to come and visit and be amazed at it. Remember, Mark Antony and Cleopatra were also in Jerusalem. He had relations with them, and actually Augustus fought against Antony and Cleopatra. But here's a coin that Herod's son Philip minted, and it's of the temple in the north that Herod built. Actually, let's see, I believe Herod Philip minted this coin. And I know you can't see it real well, but do you see how that has the triangle and then the pillars, just like this? So if we have a coin showing how they would build a temple, then I'm thinking maybe the temple was more like that. So that painting by Roberts, I think it could be more accurate. Look, probably look more like the Parthenon. Now, it would have an inner chamber and it would conform to Jewish law. But when you talk about Jewish art and architecture, I'm thinking Herod's palace here, the different homes, the temple. It's Jewish, but it's probably in the style of Greco-Roman art and architecture. So I want to go to Sepphoris real quick. You may never have heard of it. Here's Nazareth, little teeny Nazareth. Look at that right here. What is Sepphoris? People who read the New Testament know about Nazareth because Jesus grew up there, but he is 4 miles south of the largest urban center of all Galilee. It's the urban capital rebuilt by Herod Antipas, son of Herod the Great. When Herod the Great died in 4 BC, Sepphoris was burnt and destroyed because it rebelled against Rome. It was leveled. Herod Antipas, who's the Herod of the Galilee, the Herod of the Gospels, he rebuilds it. And Josephus, the Jewish historian of the 1st century, who saw it and stayed there many times, says it's the jewel of all Galilee. So I excavated at Sepphoris in the 1990s, and I want to show you some of that as well. So even though I call this Jewish Jerusalem in the time of Jesus, I'm leaving Jerusalem, but you're going to see the style of what would Herod's son have built in Sepphoris. It's on a hill. I know this doesn't look much like a hill, but it is. When you're down in the valley and look up, it's high. This is the outskirts of modern Nazareth. Today, modern Nazareth is on 7 different hills, and it's the largest Arab, Christian, Muslim city in the Holy Land. And Sepphoris is where the ancient capital was. So you see how close this is. I usually argue and speculate and think it could be well true that Jesus worked as a stonemason in Sepphoris. I know everybody says he's a tecton carpenter, right? But tecton, architect, you hear it? Tecton. Architect means the chief tecton, the one who plans the buildings. So this gets right to the lecture I'm giving. Jesus is an architect? No, he's probably a builder, a tecton. Why do I say stone? Because you don't build in wood in this time, you build in stone. So if he's a builder, he's going to be laying foundations. And then you look at the stories in the Gospels, we're talking about the historical Jesus, trying to, not the theological Jesus that, of mythology, but more, what does the text really say? He always gives examples of building. He talks about if you build a tower, you need to make the foundation deep. Why would he be talking about building towers? He seems to know something about it. So Joseph, his father, his brothers, he's the oldest, possibly are in the building trades. His father's also a tecton. According to the Gospel of Matthew, he's called Jesus, the son of Joseph, the carpenter, or tecton. It's the Greek word tecton. So that's Sepphoris really interests me because I study the historical Jesus, because I imagine he might have walked. I've walked this many times. It takes about 45 minutes. You walk from the outskirts of Nazareth to the city. Now, in the time of Jesus, it would have looked like this from Nazareth. At night, it would have been lit up. And this is an artist's conception of what it would have looked like. It's a walled city. It has a theater that's been dug. Herod has his palace, and then you have residential areas all around. Only a tiny bit of that has been uncovered, as I'm going to show you, but what's been uncovered is just fabulous. Now, Jesus in the gospel says at one point, a city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Anybody remember that phrase? City set on a hill cannot be hidden. This would light up at night with thousands of oil lamps and candles and torches. Jesus grew up outside the major urban capital. So it'd be kind of like, since we're in Charlotte, imagine somebody real famous 1,000 years from now came from Matthews, North Carolina. Okay, let's say they were president of the United States. And somebody's writing the biography of this president from Matthews, North Carolina in the far future. And they don't even mention Charlotte anywhere in the biography, just Matthews, grew up in Matthews, little town in North Carolina. And then some historians said, I liked your book and I learned a lot about this president from Matthews, but you didn't even mention Charlotte. What's Charlotte? The urban capital of North Carolina. This president grew up outside the urban capital of North Carolina, and you don't even mention Charlotte. That's where we are with Jesus. Everybody knows Nazareth. You mentioned Sepphoris, they're like, I don't know what that is. You saw the map. It's the capital. So I wanted to dig Sepphoris. Now, here's what's great about Sepphoris. This is the present ground level. We're only down 2 meters. And look at this. You got the Roman road. Isn't that amazing? This is Byzantine paving, but the Roman road is right under it. It's just great. This picture was taken years ago. It's much more developed now. I'm up on top of the hill. And it's laid out like a Roman city with the crossroads and everything, just like any Roman city. Let me look at my time again. Okay, I'm going to go a little further and then allow for questions. I know it looks like a rundown stadium, but imagine they've restored some of the seats to show you, because we found a few of the original seats. This would be the foundation. So there's a stadium. This is Crusaders, so don't worry about that. That's as I would say, that's a modern building. It's only 1,000 years old. This is 2,000 years old. Did Jesus work on the theater? There's some scholars that say that the theater is 2nd century CE, but the teacher I worked with, James Strange, the late James Strange, great archaeologist, he was convinced this was 1st century. So maybe Jesus helped carve these tiers for the seats of the theater. Who knows? Did you know the word hypocrite used in the Gospels when Jesus would refer to somebody as a hypocrite? Hypokrites. That's a Greek word. You know what it means? Stage actor. Why would he call people stage actors if nobody ever goes to the theater and sees plays? So this is opening up a whole new understanding of the historical Jesus as being someone familiar with urban life, being familiar with high Greco-Roman culture. And I think if you read the Gospels carefully, you see evidence of that. He's invited to banquets. He talks a lot about banquets, about rich people holding banquets. He attends banquets sometimes. So Sepphoris is important. Now, here's an aerial view of Sepphoris, and some of the things are marked, like this is the street I was just on. This is a cross street. These are modern roads. But mainly, you always dig on top. People dig on top right here. And they did find some pretty fabulous things. Here's the theater. This is actually a banquet hall that I'm going to show you. I put this in because this was my square in 96 when I first dug at Sepphoris, 5 by 5 meters square. And my team got down with my UNC Charlotte students. We got down to the Roman road and building right there. And I think it took us 2 weeks, as I recall. Now, what is this? Okay, this right here, it says the Dionysius Villa. That's how it's supposedly looked in the 1st century. It's called a triclinium, and it's a villa. It's from the later Roman period, but it would be foundational to what Herod Antipas built. And again, we're talking about high culture. Some of you probably been to Pompeii. It's going to remind you so much of Pompeii. Now, not much remains, but one of the things that remains is this mosaic floor. And right here, can you see that? I'm going to zoom in because I really want you to see this, if I may. I can't zoom in. Yeah, I can. There's a figurine right there. These would be Romans living in Sepphoris. And I want to show you a close-up of that. Look at that mosaic. This was so stunning, something about her face, that we started calling it the Mona Lisa of the Galilee. It was found by Eric Myers, Duke University. Some of you probably know Eric. I've heard him lecture over the years, and his team from Duke University. So this is North Carolina pride. And you just want to look at it. I just want to stop the slides and say, let's stare at this a while. I guess to some Jewish sensibilities of the time, it would be seen as pagan because they are celebrating the wine harvest and Dionysius and the fruit of the wine. But just to see an elegant Roman lady like this and the detail of the mosaic in which you can actually catch, like a Mona Lisa, an expression, it's just amazing. Even though we think this is later than the time of Jesus, it doesn't mean that he wouldn't have seen this kind of artwork in his own time. Now, we're going to go to tombs real quick and then finish up in the next few minutes. These little dots all over are tombs here's the old city of Jerusalem. Here's our dig right here. And here all around, as building has taken place over the last 100 years, tombs are uncovered. These are cave tombs carved into the bedrock of the limestone. And that's where we get some of our art. This is a rolling stone tomb. Does that sound familiar? A cave tomb? A very important tomb on the Mount of Olives. And it has some of the earliest Christian graffiti. So if I'm doing art and architecture in ancient Jerusalem, I want to include the graffiti. Here is a symbol of the tree of life. This is a symbol of eternity. These are inscriptions that have to do with Christian followers of Jesus on the walls of this particular tomb. So we don't know whose tomb it was or what it was all about, but you can see that you're getting tomb art, and it's important. That's me crawling out of a tomb. There's Dr. Gibson. He's finding a plastic bottle that people used to dig. This tomb was found June 14th, 2000. Notice, before I even started digging in Jerusalem. And we call it the Tomb of the Shroud, south of the Old City. And it had been robbed the night before. And we were with Dr. Gibson, and we were hiking in the Hinnom Valley, and he was showing our UNC Charlotte students what the tombs look like. And all of a sudden we saw this one is open. And this picture wasn't taken that night because there was all this debris and broken ossuaries, bone boxes. And here's what it looked like. So this is where we were crawling in, and it has 3 levels, and you come down to the lower level, and we found a skeletal remains of a shrouded person who died. So we actually have a 1st century shroud that we discovered. It's in the Israel Museum now. These are bone boxes and these niches. What you would do in a typical Jewish burial at the time is you would lay the body out like this gentleman for a year. As the body rots and decays and goes down to the bones, you come back and gather the bones and put them in an ossuary. This is the remains of the shroud are mainly the colored areas here. We don't have the whole shroud, but it's enough to look at the cloth, and his hair is very intact. So we have Jewish hair from the 1st century. You'd be surprised what anthropologists can do for this. It's lice-free. So this person was somebody of means, probably a priest. We have reason to think it's a priest from other things in the tomb. And he's buried here. And we also have the shroud, and it was carbon dated by the University of North Carolina. We sent it to Arizona and carbon dated it. We took all the ossuaries out, and look how they're just fragmented. The thieves had broken the ossuaries. What they're doing is taking art pieces and especially inscriptions from the ossuaries and selling them illegally. So they don't care about the ossuaries. So you can see we're missing pieces here and here and here. But we were able to do a good reconstruction and to tell what some of the ossuaries were like, and you can see some decorations. Now, this is how the bones would fit into an ossuary after a year. And then a lid would be put on, and you would scratch the name of the deceased on the side. Just to show you, this is an ossuary of a high priest, Caiaphas. Caiaphas is the priest. Right here is his name, Yosef Kapha, Joseph Caiaphas, mentioned in the Gospels as presiding over the trial of Jesus. Now, let me add this point of speculation. I know this is being recorded, so I'm going to be very careful here. But the priestly house that we're digging is in the location of the house of Caiaphas, okay? The tomb is near that location. Does it mean our house is Caiaphas's house? We would have to find an inscription, but I think it's very possible. I'm not going to say it's likely. On a 1, 2, 3, I'd give it a 2. 1 meaning no way. 2 meaning could be, there's some evidence, and 3 being, yeah, we found an inscription and it said his name, you know, on one of the plates or one of the, actually, it would probably be on his wine jugs. That's where people would write their names. But look how beautiful this is. People try to make great meanings out of this art, this funerary art. A lot of times we interpret these wheels within wheels to be eternity or something like that. But we have also explored with National Geographic a tomb that hasn't been opened. We used this robotic arm that was built. You can see the camera going in, and we didn't go in this tomb. We drilled a hole here and we're able to go down in it, and look what we found. Now that's a model, obviously, because we didn't take it out yet. We're going to take it out eventually. This is one of the ossuaries that has a fish spitting out a stick figure person, and right here it says Jonah on it. So it's an image of Jonah being spit out of the whale. Why would you put that on an ossuary? Think about it. The whale, or I said the whale, I made a mistake. We always tell our students, a great fish. It doesn't say a whale, but probably was a whale. Swallows Jonah, Whether you take it as true or legendary, mythological, doesn't matter. It's the story. And he says, I prayed from the depths of the grave. To him, he was in the grave. And then the fish vomited him up. So it became a symbol of resurrection. Here in the Roman catacombs, look, fish vomiting out man, fish vomiting out man. It's the most common image. I'm going to go, I thought I put a chart here. Maybe I didn't. Anyway, it's the most common image of Christian art later in the Roman catacombs, and we found the earliest example. This is still inside the tomb. We modeled this from our photographs and made a replica. We also found this one right next to it. It has an inscription, "O God, Jehovah, raise up, raise up." This is Greek. Let's see. Yeah, Dios, Greek, Hebrew, Greek, Hebrew. Bilingual inscription, faith and resurrection. These would be the typical decorations of an ossuary. So you get the art, but you also get the faith being expressed. This is the oldest, maybe, Christian artifact on the planet, if you agree with me. And that would be, it says Yeshua inside. That's Yod, Ayin, Vav, and so forth, Yeshua. I'm sorry, Yeshua. Yod, Shin. I can't read that one. That would be the Vav and then the Ayin. There's the Ayin, yeah. And we think this is a fish. See the little mouth here? This, and the tail crossed. Some people have said, it could just be somebody named Jesus. Yeshua is Jesus in Hebrew. And they just drew a circle around it. Well, that's a pretty bad circle. And why would you draw a circle? And we think it's the earliest sign of the fish. And this is from a 1st century tomb. So people were marking their tombs. This is Pompeii. I'm going to go to Pompeii because we have it preserved and I'm almost done. This is what was actually found in one of the upper rooms at Herculaneum, covered by ash. Reconstructed, it would look like this, some sort of a prayer table and cupboard. And some people say this is a bookshelf, but I'm convinced that it's a cross. It was covered, maybe secret worship. Here's the same cross. This you will not find in Jerusalem. Do I need to give you an identification? I don't think so. In Pompeii, you have this tells you the way to the brothel. But this is that same cross you can see, and it is found at Pompeii at the baker's house. And the baker did become a Christian. And he took down this and replaced it with this. So I think, and this is the last slide. This is at Rome. Alexander, it says, can you see some of the letters? Alexandros worships his God, and it has an ass or a horse on a cross. And some people think he had a racehorse that he worshiped. Others think it's sarcasm for Christians, where they're said to worship the head of an ass in some of the anti-Christian literature that the Romans circulated. Either way, you see some of that primitive art.